Hundreds of Cheyenne and Arapaho raised a white flag and an American flag expecting protection. Yet on the morning of November 29, 1864, their camp at Sand Creek was attacked. This episode reveals how promises, orders, and local politics collided, turning a fragile moment of trust into a defining crisis on the plains. Stay with me to untangle the conflicting official reports, first-hand accounts, and the political pressures that shaped what happened and how it was remembered. By the end, you'll understand not just the sequence of events, but why this incident mattered for policy, community memory, and the search for justice. If you want more clear, carefully sourced history like this, consider subscribing. Hook, intro, rising tension, broken promises, the attack, aftermath, historical impact, legacy. A Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment, led in part by Black Kettle, made its home along a creek in the high plains of the Colorado Territory under a flag of truce. The location had been presented to federal and territorial agents as a place where families could seek safety while the wider conflict on the plains continued, and both Native leaders and some U.S. officials labored under the belief that peaceful arrangements were possible. Reports and eyewitness accounts show clear signs that the camp sought peaceful contact. They trusted symbols and words that meant safety to them. Tensions between settlers, miners, and plains peoples were intense and escalating in the broader region, driven by competition for land and resources and by a pattern of reprisals and raids. Territorial politics amplified fear. Leaders in the Colorado Territory called for decisive action and many settlers demanded protection. Military units formed from volunteer regiments answered those calls, and a climate of suspicion hardened on both sides. Skirmishes and punitive expeditions multiplied in the months before the attack, with both the army and local militias pursuing groups accused of raids. Pressure on tribal communities increased as food sources dwindled and traditional movement patterns were disrupted by encroachment. Alliances frayed and the few channels of negotiation that remained were strained almost to breaking. Promises that had been made to certain bands contributed directly to the sense of betrayal that followed. U.S. Indian agents and some military officers had communicated assurances that specific camps were under protection if they remained peaceful and showed non-belligerent signs. Survivors later recounted how they displayed flags and camped in accordance with instructions intended to prove their peaceful intentions. Those assurances were not honored. The assault came on a cold, clear morning of November 29, 1864, when a force of Colorado volunteers moved against the encampment despite visible signals indicating non-combatant status. Men in command directed firing into the camp and mounted charges that overwhelmed defensive attempts. Many people inside were killed or wounded and others fled into the surrounding prairie. Contemporary witnesses, both native and non-native, described chaos, confusion, and the rapid unraveling of any remaining protections the camp believed it possessed. In the immediate wake, survivors scattered and many families were left without shelter or support. Black Kettle himself survived the attack, but the community was irrevocably disrupted. Local and national outrage followed conflicting narratives, and several formal investigations were convened to examine the conduct of the assault and the behavior of military and territorial leaders. Those inquiries produced strong condemnations of the action and the conduct of some officers, though criminal prosecutions did not follow, and reputations were permanently affected. The massacre reshaped the course of conflict on the plains by eliminating a locus of relative safety and hardening hostilities. It served as a catalyst for intensified resistance by some bands, and it bolstered arguments among officials and settlers who favored more aggressive suppression of native groups. At the same time, the event entered the national conversation as an example of how broken commitments and frontier politics could produce devastating outcomes. Memory and commemoration have been contested for generations. Descendants and tribal communities have worked to preserve testimony, reclaim narratives, and secure recognition of the site and the lives lost. Public history efforts, interpretive centers, and memorials now aim to present the complexity of what happened and to foster dialogue about responsibility, reconciliation, and how to remember difficult chapters of shared history. Further primary accounts and scholarly sources can be provided on request. Sand Creek in 1864 is a painful chapter in American history where promises of safety were broken and trust turned into tragedy. Tensions over land and treaties, miscommunication, and rising fears set the stage. A military force under Colonel John Chivington attacked a Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment that had sought to remain peaceful. The result was devastating for native communities, and it prompted investigations, public outcry, and decades of consequences for survivors and their descendants. Remembering Sand Creek means holding on to several key points: efforts at peace and the limits of treaty protections, how fear and politics can override humanity, the long and ongoing impact on indigenous communities, and the importance of inquiry, accountability, and remembrance. In recent decades, there have been steps toward recognition and memorialization, including the establishment of a national historic site that helps preserve the memory and allows for education and reconciliation. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing for more careful, balanced history and sharing this video so these lessons reach others. Leave your thoughts and questions below, and seek out native voices and primary sources to learn deeper. In upcoming videos, we will examine treaty histories, personal stories of resilience, and how communities work toward remembrance and justice. Thank you for listening and for keeping history in view.